This man is committed to research. He dives deep for research. Without further ado, it's my great honor to introduce my friend and colleague, Dr. George Kuh.
So I'm sorry for those of you in the back of the room who couldn't see John at the front of the raft. I appreciate the intention behind embarrassing me in front of people I don't know. But I too am delighted to be here, especially given the topic of this convening. I should say to John, actually to say to all of you about John, our friendship and colleagueship do go back, gosh, it's hard to think now, close to 30 years, though our contact has been intermittent. But I have valued and treasured your intellectual leadership for the field, and I have seen what you've done here and prior at Mansfield. I was last here more than 15 years ago, and those for the college at Brockport people, you too have seen the maturing of the campus, and this facility is just one manifestation of that. But more to the point of today, I am really honored to share the celebration of discovery with you this afternoon. I do hope that the comments I have are pertinent to what it is many of us in the room are thinking and doing. I want to introduce you to three people briefly. Now, I can't tell. Can you in the far back read this? Not really, huh? Well, I apologize. The first student here is Javier, who first in his family to go to college, started at a two-year college and then transferred, and he has spent close to a full academic year looking at how Native Americans in the Midwest interacted with their natural surroundings. I'm doing brief introductions of these three people because I want to come back and talk more about them and really more about you in a way. Sarah came really from a family of means. She would acknowledge it, both parents having been college educated, both with professional degrees. She was looking at how one can use computer applications in architecture. There's many different things one can do today with the computer to design facilities and other kinds of surroundings. And finally, Nicole, the last person that I'm going to mention here and come back to a little bit later, started college and then left after 3 semesters. Married, had a child, but the burning desire to continue to learn more brought her back to the university. And so she is now a chemistry major and involved in very, I think, high-level work looking at the properties of a new class of chemical compounds. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about Javier, Sarah, and Nicole later, but I hope that you've begun perhaps to identify with them in your own way. I want to put the work you're doing in a larger context, a very broad context, for just a few minutes, because as already been said, whatever it is you do discover in your various creative activities and inquiries, probably whatever you discover now is not going to be nearly as meaningful to you as what you have learned through this process of inquiry, creative activity discovery. And I want you to know, at least for a few moments, that the world will reward you for this eventually, what you're learning. And then I want to come back to some of these phrases that have already been used: undergraduate research, inquiry, creative activity as a high-impact practice. Explain what that means, and I hope you'll begin to see what it is that you're doing as being very, very valuable over the long term. And then I'm going to come back and talk with you a bit more about what Nicole and Sarah and Javier have been discovering about their own work. But first, audience participation. Now, I'm assuming you can read that in the back of the room, yes? Yeah? Okay. So, what percent of the entire labor force in the United States changes their job on an annual basis? B? B, 15%? E. B, E. What, did you see this slide earlier? More than a third of the people working in this country changes their job on an annual basis. And I want you just to stop and ponder that. Now, some of you have never had a job, so you probably don't much care about this slide. But those of you who have, this is not the world in which my truck driver father grew up in. Drove a truck for 35 years, kind of the same job. And by the way, I'm going to show you a couple more data slides, but you can believe this because it comes from the federal government. Department of Labor, Bureau of Labor Statistics. What percent of workers then have been with their employer fewer than 5 years? This table cannot shout out the answer. You're done. What? B? This isn't working for me either, but I appreciate your hanging in there with me. So about half, and just beginning to get this sense or being reminded of the sense of this kind of churning economic marketplace in which we live today. Oh, now it's 50% chance here you're going to get this right. I usually do this with my own chancellor, so I'll ask you to stand up, John, in terms of, no, I won't. True or false? Those of you in this room, all the students who stood up earlier, true or false, you will have between 10 and 13, 14 different jobs in your career. How many of you believe that's true? And the rest of you either think it's false or don't care. Well, it's a trick question. Yes, you will, except you'll have about twice that many jobs. And it's not by your career, it's by mid-career, by age 38 or so, give or take. That is a very different world in which many of us, your mentors, grew up. A churning economy, a world that demands what? Continuous learning, discovery, on your own, real time, nothing in the rearview mirror. So 30 million of us working in a job today that didn't exist last year. That's the kind of world you are inheriting. You can blame your mentors for it. Now, what is it that prepares someone? What kind of undergraduate curriculum, what kind of major field prepares somebody for this kind of world? And the answer is, there is no single undergraduate degree or major that can. Tony Carnevale, the author of this particular report, and his colleagues, they got a great job. They spend their days churning up all sorts of data about the workplace, where people went to school, what they majored in, how much money they make, and what they do, and how productive they are. And looking at these tens of millions of data bits, they've come to several conclusions, one of which is this unequivocal conclusion to me, which is surprising to some of us, and that is your success post-college will not depend on where you went. Brockport, Geneseo, Binghamton, no offense, good colleagues. Nor will it depend on what you majored in. It will depend on whether you leave with what they're calling this broad set of cross-cutting capacities. Some of these things have been in our vernacular for a long, long time. So whether it's chemistry or visual arts or psychology, that's not what's going to matter to you down the road. It will be what you can do with this residue of analytical reasoning and critical thinking and clarity of writing and so forth. And people have been looking at this phenomenon for decades. This is just kind of one short list of what will really matter to you when you finish. And the usual suspects are up here, the knowledge of different fields of study and the way they do their work, which is what this conference is about, the broad perspective on discovery and inquiry, and the intellectual practical skills, decision-making, and so on, and sense of personal social responsibility. I just want to unpack this last bullet, this thing that we're labeling deep integrative learning, because the capacity for deep integrative learning is the gateway to your life's work and success. And what do we mean by it? Well, there are a variety of things we mean by it. This is a thumbnail sketch. These are your demonstrated proficiency at figuring out what information really means. Not parroting, not reporting verbatim what somebody else said or wrote at some point in time. Your ability to put together different sources of information in real time so that you come up with a new kind of synthesis or understanding or insight into a problem that you're trying to solve. And can you discover patterns in information that we're awash in today, right? And can you take what you are learning in real time and apply it to situations beyond your own, for example, your own focused study or project at this moment in time? I was talking with, where are my new best friends from Fredonia? Felicia, Gabriella, Curtis, where are you? Come on, you're over there, huh? Calling you out. So I asked them at their poster, very interesting study. You can find it on the bottom of page 11. What did you learn? And of course, I kind of goaded them. I kind of pushed them into the answer I wanted, which is what faculty members are really good at, typically. And so it wasn't so much about the specific finding, right? It was about how much time that was required. They didn't expect to put that amount of time in this project, right? And how they had to take ownership for it, how they had to monitor their own time and understanding. Well, this is just a thumbnail at the surface sketch of this developed capacity for deep integrative learning. I'm sorry, you folks in the back probably can't read this. So where does this miracle occur? Under what circumstances, what conditions? President Halstead mentioned. Under what conditions does one begin to develop a capacity for deep integrative learning? What I submit to you is probably the most important set of proficiencies that you will acquire now and continuing through your life. Well, it's already been mentioned, we've discovered with all of our little kind of applied social science surveys and instruments a set of things, experiences that when students do them during their undergraduate program, they benefit to a much greater extent across all sorts of desired outcomes than their peers who don't have the opportunity. So there's a list of 10 experiences here, and I'm not going to go, fortunately for you, I'm not going to go through this entire list, but I have highlighted one that seems to be particularly germane to the day, and that is when a student does an undergraduate research project, and there are different kinds of projects, which we'll talk very briefly about in a moment. When a student is involved in an undergraduate research project, they share in this very powerful wave of benefits. We call them HIPs, high impact practices. Comes from, again, hundreds of thousands of students in the US and Canada looking at how they spend their time during college and what they gain. And so if you've done a HIP, and you are, doing an undergraduate inquiry or creative activity, you will likely benefit in these desired ways. And not only that, it turns out that these kinds of experiences, your undergraduate research project, for many people has what we call compensatory effects. And when we compensate for something, we tend to make up for a deficit in other areas of our lives. And so while everybody benefits, people who most need typically this compensatory bump get it. Sometimes they're less well prepared academically. Sometimes they come from a disadvantaged, historically underrepresented group. So, again, apologies for those in the back here, but when we think about the kinds of experiences, activities that contribute to this deep integrative learning outcome, what are they? Well, they're the kinds of classroom assignments that don't just encourage you, but require you to connect information from different classes, courses, experiences. Their opportunities to apply the theory, right? All this great stuff we read in the books and we hear in the lectures and we discuss in class, but to take those outside of that, let's call it artificial setting, and see how it works in the real world with peers and on your job and living with your parents during the summer. Some of you will have to do that again. To learn something that changes your view of yourself and the world, which may be one of the most important outcomes of the work that you are doing now in your undergraduate research project. We ask these kinds of questions of students. How often have you been asked to put together these ideas from different courses? How often do you discuss ideas with your mentors, your faculty, professional staff? How often do you do these things? And then we come up with, I'm sorry, this is not going to work. You're going to have to believe me now when I tell you this story about what these data mean. Again, I've highlighted undergraduate research here. And what you're looking at is a comparison of students who've done undergraduate research and those who've not. And you know plenty of your friends back on your home campus haven't done something similar to what you've done. So what I'm essentially showing you here is a set of data that represents about 600,000 students, some of whom have done undergraduate research, some of whom have not. And what the data represent is, if you've done an undergraduate research project, you are far more likely to engage in deep learning kinds of activities. Some of you, my friends from Fredonia, for example, are in the applied social sciences. And so many of us are probably familiar with the phrase statistically significant difference. Statistically significant difference. People kind of get goosebumps because if you get a statistically significant difference, it means you can probably publish even if the particular question is of interest to no one. So the more statistically significant differences you get, the more publications you get, and that's how I've made my career. Thank you very much for coming today. So everything on this chart, and virtually everything we do in the work at my center, comes up with statistically significant differences. But the point I want to leave you with today, or want you to walk away with, is that what these pluses represent is something far more meaningful, and that is the relative magnitude of the statistically significant difference between those who do and those who don't. And for some of you, you'll understand when I call these effect sizes, in the work that we do in the applied behavioral sciences, we never see 3 pluses. That is a huge, almost a full standard deviation between those who've had an undergraduate research experience and participate, get practice at, key point here, practice deep integrative learning. And the reason, this is a different slide, we're now moving ahead. The reason that you benefit to this degree is because the level of academic challenge you have been presented with is far greater. Once again, you see these 3 pluses. You get more practice at active collaborative learning. That is, this ought to start to sound familiar. You have to defend, right, what it is you're doing in one-to-one meetings with mentors. And then sooner or later, you're going to have to present and defend what you've studied to peers and maybe others. You interact more with your teachers because this kind of experience puts you in that particular context. And some of us, as we'll see in a moment, some of us get pretty intimidated by that, especially early on, right? The point of this is, because of the nature of the experience, no matter what form it takes, you are doing things that most undergraduates don't do. The good news is the people in the first 3 rows can actually read these slides. Employers love this. They don't. Now, let's be honest with one another. If a group of employers came and walked through this poster session, their eyes would glaze over too, because most of us don't understand the words that were on the posters. What they do understand, though, is your capacity to explain what it is you found and how one can use that in a manner of care and curiosity. They want to know that you have spent a lot of time focused on a project and you persevered and you have brought it through to completion. Employers love this stuff. They want to know that you have skills, as we've already heard, that can generalize to the kinds of unscripted, unknown today problems that their company is going to face, right? A lot of different kinds of inquiry activities represented here, 500 plus of you doing really creative stuff. 25 years ago, it was mostly students working with faculty on faculty-driven projects. That has really changed today. Now we've got many more of you working on projects that you've created out of your mind's eye because of something that has happened or you read or interacted. And there are a lot of different kinds of these, right? Some of you are doing group projects, as my new best friends from Fredonia are doing, right? Some of these are individual projects. Some are required. There are some colleges now that require every one of their graduates to have had something similar to what you are doing. Some of these are part of capstone or kind of senior thesis projects. Some folks are studying away. I didn't see anyone on this program, but some folks actually do this work as part of a study away or study abroad program. And then there are all sorts of different designs that are represented here, right? We've got the the high-end quantitative experimental design, which is favored by the National Science Foundation. No offense, whoever's here from NSF. And then we've got the quantitative quasi-experimental designs, which means that we really can't prove anything, but we're going to try like hell to do it. Still valuable in their own way. And then we've got qualitative work, more and more qualitative work. And sometimes these studies can be done of single individuals or single institutions or organizations. Sometimes they're multiple and so on. Some are cross-sectional, meaning we take a snapshot in time of something. Some are longitudinal, and some of you are going to be doing more of this work as you have more time to invest over months and years to look at changes in the dynamics of interpersonal relationships and funding patterns and so forth. Some of this work is done out of the creative performing arts, right? Presentations, recitals, exhibits, and many, many other variations on the theme. The point made earlier when faculty people go off and they end up spending all of their time talking. What did we say about PhDs? This is where you learn more and more about less and less, and pretty soon you know everything about nothing, something like that it goes. But what we have represented here is the full panoply of different kinds of inquiry projects. This is a slide just to remind me that the best project is the one that you do. The perfect. Every kind of study or inquiry has limitations. See, I love this cartoon, and I put it in anywhere, even if it doesn't make sense. Why and under what conditions does this work really make a huge difference in the life and mind of the inquirer, right? Well, mentors are very important. I'm going to come back to this in a moment. But it's about the structure and feedback that they provide in real time, especially setting something up so that the expectations are clear. So some of us do that better than others. I've had my own chances at trying to mentor undergraduate students. But the key here, and this is what most of you are experiencing, is participating, being active in the entire inquiry, creative performance cycle. From the very beginning, the idea is not someone else's. Although there's nothing is all that new under the sun. Someone has probably had an idea similar to yours, but the fact that you've begun to tease it out, it becomes part of who you are. It's your own language that's being used to explain and identify and define the parameters of the inquiry, right? And then we come up with more specific questions that we can kind of bound our project and study it in a way that removes some of the extraneous stuff. We find out who else has looked at this, right? It's the related work, the related literature, and then we design it, whatever form it might take. right? And we got to figure out then how to analyze the data, the findings, the whatever it is, the literature we're reviewing, right? And then what do we make of it? Many of you are at this stage, I sense now. What do we actually make of it? The fact that we have found this stuff. Now what? And oftentimes, this is where our work begins to fizzle, and we're not sure. Sometimes we make claims greater than the data would sustain. But struggling through the meaning and potential use, this is going to become increasingly important for you and our work. And then, of course, then the test, we share it with others. We put ourselves to the test. We'll discover even more about what we've discovered when people begin to ask us questions that we don't have the immediate answer to, and that gets us really sucked in further, because then we're going to do additional research, and you're going to end up looking like your faculty mentors. Oh my God. So this is what you're experiencing. My buddies at Fredonia talked about this. You are spending more time on this project than you ever wanted to. Am I right? Didn't expect this. Damn, how did this happen? And you are spending more time talking with your teachers, professional staff, and your peers about these intellectual matters. Who'd have thunk that you would develop a vocabulary like that, right? And you're experiencing diversity, maybe not the kind of structural diversity we often talk about, people from different races and ethnicities. That happens. Certainly it happens in lab settings and field work where you're working alongside someone you never would have expected to talk with. And you learn things about their points of view. But there are other human differences and intellectual differences that are really meaty and meaningful, that stretch your own mind. And what is really fascinating and powerful is you are getting feedback about the quality of your thinking. And that is too rare a commodity in the world in which we work. None of us gets better without feedback, and hopefully it's helpful. And you're discovering that what you're doing actually is relevant to your mind, to your work, to your life. And then when we ask you to publicly demonstrate, as we are going to do, you're doing it here, poster presentations, paper presentations. Wow. That is very, very powerful stuff. It's the very kind of thing your prospective employer or graduate student advisor is going to want to see from you. So benefits, wide spectrum of benefits. When you talk with one another, when you listen to one another about what you've gained from this experience, a sense of confidence and competence and being able to do something on your own, and this deeper understanding of not just your own project, but about the world around you, because you now recognize the ambiguities and complexities and nuances of things that are supposed to be fairly straightforward, and you are in the company all the more frequently of an expert, and you can see firsthand how they deal with problems in the field or in the lab, or trying to make sense of things that look to be nonsensical at first. This kind of residue of expertise washing over you and figuring out, when you get your own voice, how this works for you. And then some of us will walk away with a little clearer understanding of what we want to do, at least at this moment in time, with our life. So here's Sarah. Remember Sarah? She is using the computer to design different kinds of living and work spaces. She wanted to see really if her own ideas had value. And, like the rest of us, early on, she's not terribly confident about her own ideas. And so it's much easier to glob onto someone else's way of thinking and understanding. But sooner or later, she discovers that that isn't going to quite fit what she needs to do. And here's Nicole, kind of in a similar way of thinking. And she's got a lot of practical competencies she's now teasing out. Learning how to write these kinds of reports. By the way, the kinds of reports you're writing and the kinds of mechanisms that you'll need, the conventions you are developing, are transferable to a larger world. That's why employers want to see people who've done what you've done over an extended period of time. So she's going to be more confident because she's had more practice doing things that matter in the larger world. She's pretty confident now that this experience puts her on a good trajectory for graduate school. Sarah, again, she's been forced to talk to people out loud about what she's doing, to hear her own voice. And the more she explains it, the more confident she gets, and the more she learns about her own thinking. You know, how do I know what I think until I hear myself say it? Sarah's getting that. Javier, lots of ambiguity in your work, isn't there? Just what you thought was going to be cut and dried, you're starting to, and all of a sudden it kind of breaks apart, and that's, in some instances, what a mentor is for. But the mentor, the best mentor, is not telling you specifically what to do next, but teasing out of you what makes sense to you and sharing what might make sense to her or him in a certain similar situation. Making me think, but not alone. Not making me think alone. Making me think with the kind of feedback that comes with the intellectual give and take. And here's Nicole. Remember when I spoke about deep integrative learning? Nicole is starting to get it. Some of you will get it. This is using techniques in the lab, but it can be in any discipline, right? I would memorize the stuff for class and then forget it. How often has that happened to you? You memorize it, you regurgitate it, and then because you don't use it, it lacks meaning and purpose. But that's not what happens in the lab with Nicole with her own experiments, right? She has done it, and she can actually picture it in her mind's eye. And here's Nicole again. When it's mine, when it's my project, I am putting forth more effort. And I now know what good science looks like, right? And I want to be sure that what I found isn't a one-time only, made a mistake, it's a fluke. Is this a good experiment? Have I looked at all the variables? Have I missed something? Too often this does not happen in the routine class. This is not a criticism of routine courses and classes. It's just different when you own it. You belong to it, and it belongs to you, right? So Sarah's working with computers, and this is kind of groundbreaking stuff for her several years ago. Not very many people know how to use this kind of equipment, and so she's got to try to figure it out on her own, with some help, of course, and she's doing it. I mentioned continuous learning earlier, that the deep integrative learning proficiencies are the pathway to what it is you're going to be doing the rest of your life. Learning new stuff in real time. And so Javier, even though he did a anthropological, kind of deep-seated, kind of historical view, he's finding out that there's always more. This is the bane of our existence, good friends. You get involved in this discovery, inquiry stuff, there's always more. This is the bad news. Your project will never end. It will never end. The good news is the semester will end, and then maybe people will go away. But the work, the intellectual work, it will never end. It will just get deeper and broader and probably more fulfilling as you get other ideas, other things that you need to discover. And then you got to make this stuff matter. Some of our fields are more applicable to the world of direct application and so forth. Some are not, right? But here it is, you know. Nicole thought she was done, and then her mentor said, no, you've got to present it in a way that other people can learn from what you've learned. And sometimes it's writing that goofy little detailed paper, but more of the time there'll be that paper, and then how do I translate it to people who aren't going to read this paper because they won't have the background to understand it, but I got to find the words that will make it have meaning to people who don't know as much as I know. Mentors are really important. Those of you who are in this room, those who aren't represented here today, they're important in many, many ways. This is the thumbnail sketch, things that you do naturally, the research mentors in the room, right? Helping us, the inquirer, be clear about what it is we're trying to find out, using our knowledge of the field, allied areas, to point those of us who are now novice discoverers in a direction that can be profitable. What are the canons, accepted canons of designing and collecting information that fit the best conventions of the particular discipline? And then, of course, this ongoing support, really it's ongoing challenge and support. Getting better, doing better, finding out more. All along the way. So this emotional support cannot be underemphasized. Here's Javier. This is I love Javier. You know, my mentor really didn't know a whole lot about what I was doing. I'm sorry, folks, but that's true of a lot of us research mentors here. We don't know everything. We like to say we know pretty much what we need to know, but it's not always knowing specifically what is important to a given problem, but it is knowing how to encourage others to find what they need to know. You know, his mentor had been through different kinds of inquiry projects, and he draws on that to help Javier figure out what to do next. And here's Sarah. I mentioned this earlier. Sarah, like most of the rest of us, are kind of intimidated at first. I mean, I'm doing something, come on, let's be honest, I really don't know how to do. I've never done this before. And so there is this, not wall, but there's distance. And it's an appropriate distance. I mean, we do want our mentors to kind of know more and be more and so on, but sooner or later, that breaks down, so we're more into a kind of a collaborative process, much of which comes from my own increasing sense of confidence and competence as I move forward. Well, here are a couple more data. Good news is I'm close to the end, so I'll be done in 5 minutes, if you're keeping track of time. It's a funny thing. Well, this isn't funny. This particular slide, database slide from our hundreds of thousands of students and tens of thousands of faculty, simply says that the more time faculty spend on research, the greater the percentage of undergraduate students at that school who will get involved in it. Probably not a surprise. I'll repeat that to those of you, including myself, who didn't quite understand it. That is, the more time, on average, a group of faculty at an institution devote to their own scholarship and inquiry, the greater the percentage of students at that school who will get involved in undergraduate research. Now hold that thought, because I hope it takes you in a direction that I want you to go, but you shouldn't. Again, apologies to the people in the back of the room, but what I'm showing here are the average amounts of time in a week that faculty members at different kinds of institutions spend on their research. That's the purple bar. And then the average amount of time that undergraduate students at that type of institution spend on research. And what you'd expect to see here, the one on the far left here, are the doctoral research universities. They're the universities that I have worked my entire career at, where faculty members on average spend 12 hours a week on their research. Are you with me here? I mean, only 4 of you are interested in this, but I'm interested in this, I'm going to finish. And then you've got different kinds of institutions. Institutions that don't offer doctorates but offer graduate programs, and a couple then of sets of institutions that offer only undergraduate. Now, the takeaway from this slide is very, very simple. And that is, it doesn't matter where you go to university in terms of the likelihood that you'll be spending time on undergraduate research. Because students at doctoral universities, on average, spend about 2.5 hours a week That's true of students at every other kind of university. It kind of flies in the face of what we think about doctoral level universities. They have their place, certainly. I'm not trying to, well, I am comparing one against the other, but only for this purpose, because what really matters, and this is, I hope this kind of stays with those of us who are going to end up in a professorial or research mentorship role, whether you got one now or whether you're on that path. What really matters to whether students are going to do undergraduate inquiry is not how many hours a week people spend doing it, but how important they think it is for a student to do it. So what you've got on the horizontal line here is the percentages of people at institutions, or the value that faculty place on it. How important is it that a graduate from the college at Brockport do an undergraduate research project before they finish? And then you've got the percentages of students at an institution who do it. And so the trace line here is that the more important the faculty as a group think it is for students to have this experience, the larger number of students get it. Not about money, not about how many hours a week I particularly personally spend. It's how important we think this work is to preparing students for a very uncertain future. So I don't need to tell you this, you already know it. You know, if you're one of those here presenting with a poster or a presentation, at some point in time, you've been challenged more than you can imagine, and this too is such a valuable lesson for us, a sense of confidence that we can push through. We can deal with ambiguity and complexity. If we spend enough time, we get enough structure and support, we can do it, and it does take an enormous amount of time. But nothing of value in our lives comes easy. Everything that matters takes time, and mostly effort. And you've got people around you, thank goodness for the mentors and others who are there to support and give you the guidance when you need it, and also maintain the high level of challenge. And when this work really pays off is when you begin to change your own assumptions about the way the world works, about being open to questioning whether what you think you know is really valid under what kinds of circumstances, right? These are among the most valuable lessons. And for us, in the privileged position of guiding you and helping you through this, it's about making sure we're clear about who does what under what circumstances, and to what level of expectation can I hold you. And as it is with the inquirer, you know, none of this is a simple matter. It takes some time and effort on our part. And we can't forget the support, but at the same time, we must have a high level of challenge posed to the people that we're working with. And the more we can do to get more of our colleagues who are amenable to this enterprise, the better, because the more of us who are willing to do it, the greater the number of students at our place who are willing to do it. And the payoff comes not just for individuals, but for the institution and those fortunate enough to employ them. So I'm going to finish with Aristotle, because almost nobody knows whether Aristotle said this, and pretty safe, you know, making the claim. And by the way, I don't know if you can't see this in the back, but this is an undergraduate student at Luther College, which happens to be my alma mater, the Harvard of Northeast Iowa. So I always like to show a picture of Luther College. So you're about an enterprise that can only be figured out by engaging in it. You know, this notion of discovery, of the creative act, is always brand new to you, to somebody, right? And the only way we learn how to do this is to do it. Thank you.